This is IATA.com. Primetime sports all the time.
And now from Times Square, crossroads of the World Wide Web, and sponsored in part by the Office of National Drug Control Policy, it's the Wrestling Observer Live with Dave Meltzer.
How's it going, everybody? Dave Meltzer here for the next 2 hours. We're going to be talking pro wrestling. In fact, we're going to have the Honky Tonk man on for the first time on this show, and he is very outspoken on a lot of topics. So if you want to talk to him about his stint in the WWF, which is probably what he's most famous for, actually he wrestled all over. He wrestled in Calgary for many years. He wrestled in the South. Alabama circuit. He's actually a cousin of Jerry Lawler, which a lot of people know and a lot of people don't know. Worked for WCW for a little while, and actually was back at the Royal Rumble for about a minute, and talk about his views on the current wrestling scene, his career. You can join us and call us up in about a half an hour. Of course, we've got Brian Alvarez here of Figure 4 Weekly. Just finished the issue, I'm presuming, last night. How'd it go?
Hey, it went pretty good.
Good.
I like how Honky actually emailed us to remind us that this was going to be a no-holds-barred interview.
Yeah, it's like zinc, right?
Something right there.
Yeah. He's got a lot of. I read something that he wrote to some people at WCW, and it was just hilarious about the current wrestling scene. We'll probably talk to him about his. Very outspoken, we'll say that. So it will be an interesting show. Yeah, last night was a long night. One of those nights when the computer doesn't work and it's Tuesday.
Oh, that's good.
Oh yeah, it was quite a night, but I'm alive. Actually, the issue turned out all right. And I woke up today and got all of my XFL demographics, and after looking at the XFL demographic breakdown, it was even sadder. I don't know if you got to look at the thing I wrote, but it's actually...
I looked at the WCW one from Monday. I didn't see the XFL one yet.
Okay.
I was actually surprised to see that up there last night at like midnight. I was going, man, Dave must have been done 3 hours ago. Here's some breakdowns on the website.
No, what happened was that the program to print the envelopes for foreign was like shut down, so I had like 2 hours to kill at like midnight, and I was already done with the Observer. So it was like one of those things where I got to stay up. And I might as well go through I was going to do that today anyway. I might as well go through that. So that's what that was. But when you look at the demographics of the XFL, it's even sadder than the ratings drop because they've gone from the first week on NBC. We talked about it. They had the strong wrestling audience and the strong teenage audience, especially, and young adults. 12 to 24. That was their kind of the group they expected to get. They were going to have the big lead-in for Saturday Night Live. Well, anyway, the second week, the 12 to 24 age group just plummeted, down 70%, 71%.
Yikes.
And now the prime age group is 49-plus males.
So,
for XFL.
Would that mean football fans?
I don't know if it just means people who don't go out of the house on Saturday night, and that no one stays home to watch the XFL, or if that means football fans. No, but I mean... The way the TNN game actually skewed fairly low, and I'm attributing that to the fact that it was promoted so heavily on TNN, which is a wrestling station. The TNN is promoting so heavily with those ridiculous. We've got pop commercials that actually are. I can't believe they're effective.
Yes.
But TNN skews younger, so they actually had a younger thing. UPN did about the same as they did the first week, no real difference. But the NBC, I think that it's more of an older football audience of the people that are still watching, but that wrestling audience is gone. I think it's gone on all the shows, really.
Yikes.
So
that's not good.
No, they're going.
We did by the way, I want to mention the poll on the website we did yesterday. Speaking of XFL, it was what fans figured the chances of success were. Would it last this season, and would it be around next season? And it was yes, 51%. No, 49%. So it's like split right down the middle.
That it would be back next season?
Yeah.
Really? I'm surprised it's 51% up. That thing will be back next season. I think the odds of it being back next season, it's too early to say for sure, but,
They kind of dropped this weekend.
I would say that I mean, if it was just the ratings alone, I wouldn't really, I would say that it's too early to tell. Because if the ratings don't drop again, they're not all that bad off. They're not well off, but they're not that bad off. But the ratings probably will drop again. But, I mean, just based on the reaction of the media and the reaction at NBC, and having that emergency meeting, to me, I think that they've half-assed made their minds up that, barring a miracle, that they're going to go through with the season and then kind of like whisk it away. I don't know. That's certainly the impression I got.
How will Vince handle that?
I don't know. Maybe just like quietly let it go away.
Yeah.
And just, see, if it goes through the season and they just don't talk about it ever again, it just kind of like goes away. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe they could do a stipulation. If this particular team wins, the league must shut down forever. Remember like when WCW did that with Nitro? NWO would get Nitro?
Yeah. Let's see. We should look at SmackDown from last night at Nassau Coliseum. I heard that it was a sellout crowd, but not a very responsive crowd. Let me look at some of the notes here. See, SmackDown. Okay, Triple H announces the stipulations for the main event at No Way Out. That's the thing about this. They're going to do 3 matches, best 2 out of 3. First match will be a straight wrestling match. The second match will be a street fight. And then the third match, if needed, which will be needed, will be a cage match with Austin and Triple H, plus Rock and Kurt Angle, of course the Edge, Christian, Dudleys, and Undertaker and Kane 3-way. And also they have added Stephanie McMahon against Trish Stratus, which hopefully will be a very short match.
I know this would never happen, because I just don't see Hunter taking 2 straight matches. But what if Hunter won the first match, and then he won the second match by a total screw job, and then Austin just demanded, hey, I've already lost, let's just do this cage match anyway, and then just totally squashed him.
That's not how I would do it.
I mean, Austin would get his big win, everyone would be happy, but he would have lost. And Hunter could say, I got 2 straight wins over you.
I think that this is...
They're probably going to split him.
Oh, of course they're going to split him.
Yeah.
I'd say, okay, I think Helmsley should win the wrestling match. Okay? Austin then, of course, has to win the street fight.
Mm-hmm.
The third one, it really doesn't matter who would win the third one based on, for the future, because they could have Austin win on a fluke, so he gets his hand raised going into WrestleMania. Okay? Which probably is the way to do it. And then Hunter can just go, but in the wrestling match, I beat you. I mean, Hunter wins that wrestling match with a pedigree in the middle, and then Austin wins the street fight with a stunner, and then the third one, there's a fluke, but Austin gets his hand raised. Or Hunter can get his hand raised with a total fluke, where Rock costs Austin the match somehow when he's trying to help Austin.
Austin would get his hand raised in the third one, too, so he would win the series?
Oh, no, it could go either way. I think that who gets their hand raised, you could do it where Austin wins on a fluke. The third one should be a fluke. As long as Hunter...
They're kind of going to kill a cage if they have a fluke, though.
They're going to... I think that they don't help their gimmicks anyway by doing 3 of them and by doing 3 matches in one night. The other thing I think was dangerous about this one is that they want Austin and Helmsley to carry the summer. And that's why... And the problem with that is once you've seen them wrestle 3 times on one pay-per-view...
With 3 gimmicks?
With 3 gimmicks, including the cage, what are you going to do? Have a Hell in the Cell again? For the summer papers. That's why I think it's sort of, doing all of them in one night. I mean, I wouldn't do it that way, but it does leave you booking outs in that Helmsley can win that first wrestling match, and then it really doesn't matter what you do in the other 2 because he's got his thing saying, I beat you clean in a wrestling match. I mean, Austin can actually win the whole thing, but the key is when they come back, if Austin's the champion, they come back after WrestleMania, the match they're going to wrestle is a wrestling match. Okay?
Yeah.
And they can say, they had a wrestling match, both guys were fresh, and Hunter pedigreed and pinned him. That's not to say that's how they'll do it, but it's a way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's some theories on that thing. Okay, so anyway, they opened with Kane beating Edge, and what was that? Yeah, just a clothesline off the top ropes, I believe. And they were supposed to do a table break, which didn't happen. And then, let's see, they had Matt Hardy beat Perry Saturn. This was a night of a lot of screw jobs. That actually was a clean win. And then afterwards, Dean Malenko came down and kisses Lita. And anyway, they set up a match Monday night at Raw with Lita against Dean Malenko, and uh-oh is right. Then it's Steve Austin against Chris Benoit, and Steve Austin wins that one with a stunner when Triple H distracts the ref, throws in a chair for Benoit. Benoit gets the chair, but before he can hit it, he gets stunned. But they do give Benoit some stuff at the end, so they don't just squash him and leave him for dead. Jericho and X-Pac has a very weird finish because X-Pac hits his finisher, the X-Factor. And then
That's
Eddie Guerrero...
weird.
What?
That's weird?
Yeah, because it's a heel.
It's like
I know what you're saying. Yeah. But so anyway, Eddie Guerrero does a run-in to save the title for Chris Jericho. And then Justin Credible does a run-in, and it ends up with Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho working together and eliminating X-Pac and Justin. But then Eddie Guerrero... Eddie Guerrero's lied down, is lied out somewhere, and then Jericho hits Eddie Guerrero with a chair when it's all said and done. Then we got the beginning of that was actually the first of the screw jobs, and then we got a bunch more. Big Show and Raven for the hardcore title, and a hardcore title match ends in a no contest when the whole world interferes and Raven just escapes, and Raven sells, or actually Big Show sells absolutely nothing for Raven the entire match. Then we got the last screw job, which is Rock and Triple H. And there's a referee bump. Let's see, Angle's out. Triple H goes for a pin after a pedigree, but there's no ref. Then Chris Benoit comes in and puts Austin in the crossface. And then Kurt Angle puts Rock in an ankle lock. And the referee rules the match a no contest. So the show, I guess, ends with Rock and Austin both laid out by Angle and Benoit, which I guess would probably set up Rock and Austin as a tag team Monday on Raw against Angle and Benoit. Of course, after the cameras went off, Angle and Benoit didn't do so well.
Hey, then they can do Monday. It would be Rock's, let's see, what would it be? Austin screwing up and causing Angle to pin Rock. So Angle pins him right before having to do the job doing the pay-per-view.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. That makes sense.
And you set up WrestleMania.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Poll question for Monday Night's Wrestling. What show did you think was better? Raw, 49%. Nitro, 14%, which actually I thought was a little bit closer than I expected it. Not that that's very close. I just thought Nitro wasn't really all that good, except for the one match. Didn't watch Raw, 2%. Didn't watch Nitro, 25%. Didn't watch Raw or Nitro, 10%. We have a totally goofy question up today. Let me see if I can find it. It has to do with if there was a tournament and all the world champions were in it. I got 4 world champions. Let me see how it's worded. Okay. If all of the world champions were in a tournament and it was real, like no scripted finishes, under Pride rules. Okay, so these are the rules, not amateur wrestling rules, Pride rules. Who do you think would wind up winning the tournament? A, Kurt Angle, B, Scott Steiner, C, Kensuke Sasaki, D, Mark Coleman, or E, whoever was the luckiest on that given day. So, just an interesting little look at that one. Let me see. Molson signed a sponsorship deal with WWF today. And what else? They will be offering, let's see. Anyway, they're going to be doing some stuff there. Let's see. The final XFL numbers were 4.58 on NBC, 2.09 on UPN, and 1.87 nationally on TNN, which is actually 2.40 cable rating. Any other news to get
If they hired Tony Schiavone, he could come up with a 10 for that.
Linda McMahon could too.
A 10 total. I thought he was going to hire that Faber guy about halfway through that interview.
Oh, really?
The way he was putting over WWF in every possible way with his, I guess, just not knowing what he was talking about.
Yeah.
We got to talk about Tajiri and Lynn.
Yeah, Tajiri and Lynn both have signed contracts and have sent them to the office. I think the office actually has not signed the contracts, but obviously that's a formality. So basically, they're both in the 3-year deals. So crazy, still up in the air. There is interest in WWF. There is interest in WCW, but there's not a lot of interest as far as money being offered from either side.
Mm-hmm.
So he may end up wrestling in Mexico and Puerto Rico for a while until somebody has more interest in him. And who else? Kid Cash, haven't heard anything new. Paul Heyman, there is nothing new to hear. And I think that's largely it on that account. Any other news?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm going to start hitting some emails. This is from Aaron Steinke, who says, maybe Vince should consider having the XFL on a different night. I'm a teenager, which seems to be the target audience. Well, it was. It's not anymore. Just like any other teenager, I go out on Friday and Saturday, and I don't get home till midnight or 1 a.m. at the earliest. Did Vince consider that at all? I believe he'd probably, and NBC probably did consider that, but they probably thought that Vince McMahon has the Midas touch, and he can keep teenagers at home. Or at least enough of them. And he did the first week. Okay, this is... I just wondered how Stone Cold Steve Austin came to use the move called the Luthez Press. I don't know, he just started doing it.
How he came to use it?
How he came to use it. Started using it. It's from Jim Krause, who goes, growing up in Detroit and following the local promotion, the Sheik was the man. He was hated by everyone. He drew big crowds with the Funks, Dusty Rhodes, etc. Actually, as I recall, by the time the Funks and Dusty came, the Sheik wasn't drawing very big crowds. The Sheik drew big crowds, really big crowds, like with Bobo Brazil and Pampero Firpo and Dick the Bruiser. And, God, who else were the top guys in Detroit in the late 60s? His big run was really 65 to 73 or so. After that, his drawing power faded because it was just too much of the same thing. Anyway, what is his place in the history of wrestling nationally and worldwide? He's absolutely a legendary character from that era, no doubt about it. One of the great heels of all time. Did he draw in other markets? Yes. The Sheik pretty much drew everywhere he went. I'm really curious about his standing in the business because here he was a legend. I mean, he was more famous in Detroit because he was the man in Detroit, but he traveled everywhere. It was one of those weird things. It's just so different then than now. But I mean, the Sheik, he could come to San Francisco, and he probably came like once every 5 years. But when he came, like, everybody knew who he was, and there's no reason they should have, because aside from wrestling magazines, which didn't really have large circulations, there's no way that people would know, but somehow they did anyway. I can't exactly explain it. Do
you think it was really that they all knew, or do you think that it was just kind of enough hardcores knew that the word got around?
You know what else? I think that at the buildings and stuff, what it is that if you knew how to get over in that era, you could get over in the building. Because, I remember guys walking to the ring, like the Funks, just an example, at the Cow Palace, who never worked the area. And they would walk to the ring, and there really was, there was that kind of that buzz, like, we kind of know that name, but we really don't know if he's a heel or a babyface. We really don't know. But 3 to 5 minutes into the match, the place would be going unglued because they actually knew how to work a crowd, and the crowd responded just to the good work.
Yeah.
And I think the Sheik was like that because he came in, there was blood in the first minute, and people just went crazy, because he did the pencil and all that. He did a lot of stuff that nobody else did, the fighting outside the ring. And, it was something new to the markets. Here, God, the Sheik did something in San Francisco in 62, I'm thinking. And, I wasn't even watching wrestling till almost 10 years later, 8 years later. And I would go to the matches, and people would bring up this angle that the Sheik did, 8 years earlier. Everybody, like, do you remember when the Sheik, chased, there was a sponsor, I think it was Jim Wesson or some name, some old San Francisco fan can correct me on this, when the Sheik chased Jim Wesson up a pole or something like that, the sponsor, and bashed in the cars that they had at the studio. I don't even remember and people go, do you remember, it was something that people, think everyone saw, because the ratings were through the roof, but it's like, I was like 2 years old. How could I have ever seen that?
Well, I'm just talking about, the buzz. Remember when they did the Royal Rumble and Taz was going to debut? And there were, these Taz chants when Kurt Angle just came out. And it was like, you can't tell me that 18,000 people, or however many people were there, all had been reading the Internet that afternoon and knew that he was going to be there. It had to be an example of a whole bunch of people knew, maybe to 5%, and the word just kind of spread.
It's interesting because somebody was talking to me about, Sandman worked this weekend in Puerto Rico. He worked Saturday and Sunday. Saturday was in Bayamon, and Sunday was in some place somewhere else. And in Puerto Rico, generally speaking, nobody should know him.
Yeah.
And what happened the first night, the way it was explained to me, the first night, probably a third of the fans kind of knew the name, and maybe, 15, 20% kind of knew to chant ECW, right?
Mm-hmm.
But since it was the main event on the show, he was teaming with Savio Vega, who's the number one babyface. The rest of the people who had no idea who he was just got into it because it's the main event, and there's this guy who's, looks kind of different. Now, they said the next night, when literally they went to whatever city they went to, where literally nobody knew who he was, because the 20%, there wasn't that 20% to react like this guy's something important.
Yeah.
Nobody cared who he was at all.
Huh.
That's kind of how it was explained, because I was going like, because I asked someone who was down there, like, how'd they react to Sandman? And it was like, it's weird because most of the fans didn't know who he was, but enough of them did in the San Juan area to where
they could influence like everyone else.
Well, it's like, remember Jericho the first time? Jericho was on WWF? It was like, it really was only 20 to 35% of the building knew who he was, and they were going crazy, and we were talking about how that 35% would eventually influence everyone else because they're making so much noise that everyone thinks he must be important.
Yeah.
And the next night, when they didn't have that 20% or 30% or whatever it is, there was no one thinking he's important, so nobody cared who he was.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from the Women of Wrestling website. This is actually the reasons for that TV taping postponement. They're very clever reasons, and it was not a bomb threat. The reasons behind the postponement stem from the hectic pre-pay-per-view schedule taking its toll on the ladies. Prior to the pay-per-view, tapings were done at the pace of one per month.
Oh, my God.
Which is a hectic pace. In addition, the postponed taping would have occurred only 2 weeks after the pay-per-view, which is far too soon. And it is a long weekend in the States, so it should be an opportunity for the wrestlers to visit their families and their loved ones. So that's the reason.
It's a long weekend.
It's a long weekend. That's a holiday weekend.
Oh, okay.
People. Yeah. Let's see. I understand that NBC was upset about Saturday Night Live being delayed by the XFL, but consider that Jim Ross plugged an episode of Friends running directly against SmackDown. Maybe NBC should remember respect is a two-way street. That's the promos. You know what I mean? I'm sure Jim Ross didn't want to plug. Hey, by the way, they're doing a supersized episode of Friends on Thursday. Thursday from 8 to 9, so don't miss it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, let's see. This is an interesting letter from Eric. He goes, I listened with great interest to the show where you interviewed Julian Shabazz. Although you didn't go into a lot of depth about it, there was some discussion about the racial discrimination lawsuit against WCW. I believe Shabazz said that it would be WCW's best interest to settle. Did he mean they should settle to make it go away, or they should settle to admit they actually did discriminate? Although I'm sure that some minority wrestlers, particularly some Mexican and Japanese wrestlers, have been victims of the closed-minded mentality of guys like Vince Russo when it comes to being pushed, the discrimination thing is overblown. Can people really say in all seriousness that Hardbody Harrison and Bobby Walker were not pushed because they were black? Are these two men truly that talented that if they were white, they would have been pushed? I don't think any rational thinking, knowledgeable wrestling fan, black or white, can answer yes to that question. I'm not making light of instances of discrimination and racism. It just seems that many minorities, not just in wrestling, are of a mindset that anytime something doesn't go in their way, it's because of racism. We all know that's not the case. There could be an infinite number of reasons why circumstances play themselves out the way they do, none of which have to do with the race. Unfortunately, whenever someone cries racism and discrimination, the onus falls on the alleged perpetrator of said discrimination to prove otherwise. I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but minorities have a built-in culprit, racism, on which to blame everything that doesn't go their way. For example, a white wrestler with talent who isn't pushed can't claim he was held back because of racism, but a black wrestler with little or no talent can. Take Blitzkrieg, for example. Here's a guy with tremendous talent who didn't receive anywhere near the push he deserved. If he were a minority, he could claim he was being discriminated against because of his race and possibly benefit monetarily if WCW would settle the suit. His problem was not that he was Mexican, but he wrestled Mexican style.
Yeah, he was portrayed as one.
Yeah, they portrayed him as a Mexican even though he wasn't.
I mean, the whole thing with this case is they've got Vince Russo making his statement. I'm an American. I want to watch Americans.
That was
what an idiot.
That was such a silly statement to make. Now, but the point is, he made that statement before he got the job. And when he got the job, he sort of tried to temper it a little bit, although he didn't really know how to. Because, he pushed Hoovy because Hoovy made him laugh. But he didn't really push Hoovy.
Yeah.
He gave him that. Okay. I think it's safe to say that Blitzkrieg is much more deserving of a push than Hardbody Harrison or Bobby Walker. But because he's white, he cannot claim he was discriminated against. And he's discriminated against for style. So obviously simply being a minority is not the reason for wrestlers not being pushed. I hate to say it, but this lawsuit borders on extortion. It'll be easier for WCW to simply settle it and make it go away than to fight it out, which the plaintiffs are banking on, even though the merits of the case are weak. We're getting to the point where if someone who is a minority feels that he or she is not being pushed or promoted outside of wrestling, they can always fall back on it's because of racism excuse, and in most cases, companies they work for have to give in with their demands or risk being labeled as racist. It's sad because it lessens the importance of cases where racism truly is a factor and needs to be addressed. This is from Mike, who says, Everyone wants an excuse on this one. You'll like this. Regarding the Big Show's weight, I think it may have to do as why he looked fatter. I rented the Survivor DVD, and the winner, Richard Hatch, lost all kinds of weight from the first show to the last, but he looked fatter at the end. In one scene, he pitched his gut to show the loose skin that losing the weight had given him.
Because he lost muscle.
Yeah.
That's my theory on Big Show.
Okay, this is what... But he's enormous. How much muscle could he lose? Did you see how big that guy is?
That's true, but I think that's why he looks more jiggly.
Oh, it could mean he could be more flabby, but he doesn't look smaller. I mean, like, you could have, like, looser skin, but you would be smaller with looser skin, when you drop a lot of weight. You wouldn't be larger with looser skin unless you were, like, carrying, like,
But how much have they said that he's lost? Like 40 pounds or what?
66.
66? Okay, he could have lost like 40 pounds of muscle. He wouldn't be that much smaller. He's 414 pounds.
But he would be way smaller. If you lost 40 pounds of muscle, you'd be... Brian, if you lost... Okay, you're a smaller guy than the Big Show. But if you lost... Think about this, okay? Big Show's 450. Okay, so he's 2.5 times your size. If you lost... Okay, he lost 40 pounds. So let's say you lost 15 pounds of muscle, right now, in the next 6 weeks, and you walked into the room, would people go, Brian, you know what? You look bigger.
They may.
No, they wouldn't. Okay, you could say if you dieted perfectly and you lost 15 pounds of fat, people may ask.
Then they would. But
then there'd be an illusion that you're bigger when you're small.
If I lost 15 pounds of muscle, I would look smaller and fatter.
That's right. Okay, so that's my point. Okay. We got Honky Tonk Man. We got Honky Tonk Man on the line. We're going to get to him. Honky Tonk Man, how you doing today?
Very good. I can barely hear you. You're going to have to turn it up.
Okay, Al, crank this thing up. We're going to have a good show today. Okay. I guess first thing we should talk about is, I don't know, well, I guess we'll start with your career. A lot of people know you from your heyday in the World Wrestling Federation in the late 80s. But you wrestled for many years, Memphis, Calgary, Alabama, headliner in a lot of those territories. What before you went to WWF, what were some of the places that you went to?
The ones you said. I was in Nashville, Memphis, Pensacola, Atlanta, Tampa territory, and yeah, that was about it. Then I went to Calgary, twice in Calgary. I didn't get enough the first time. I was glutton for punishment, I guess.
Were any of those territories more like that you liked them more or hated them more than any of the other ones?
No, they were basically all the same. I didn't particularly care about Tampa because we weren't being used good on the card underneath, and the trips are quite long. When you drove from Tampa to Miami and then maybe up north to Tallahassee, the trips are quite long, and I just never really cared about that.
Now, Calgary, you were pushed pretty heavily in Calgary. Did you like it there, or was the weather harsh for you coming from the States, or?
Once again, the trips were very hard. Yeah, the weather was harsh. It was a reality check. I left the beaches of Pensacola, Florida, just prior to Christmas that year, and the heaviest clothes I had was sweatshirt and sweatpants, and I got to Calgary. It was 35 below zero 3 days later. Brother, I'll tell you, I didn't know what I was in for.
Now, how was working there? That was an interesting time in the business because they had a lot of guys that ended up being big stars elsewhere, like Dynamite Kid, and it was just an interesting collection of talent there. I mean, how did you like your 2 trips there?
I was fortunately the first time I was there, myself and Dr. D. David Schultz and the Cuban Assassin, and a boy I went to high school and junior high with Mike Miller from Portland. We were all traveling in a car together, and sometimes this guy Kerry Brown. And we didn't ride in the van, the 13 guys in the van, and pull a ring behind it. But the second time I was there, I did the van deal, or the bus. They had one time, a 1950 bus that broke down every day. But it wasn't too bad. In the summer times, it was good. We only had 3-4 days a week we wrestled. In the winters, when we wrestled the most, and we drew big crowds. And Stu Hart was a great guy to work for. Probably one of the most honest guys I ever worked for.
Now, how did you first get discovered? Was Hogan instrumental in bringing you into WWF? Or was
they had a show in Calgary. What happened, Vince had gone through and taken Dynamite, Davey, Brett, and Jim the first run through there, the first year George Scott had, and as he had done all across America, and I was still there. David Schultz had left. David had left and went to Minneapolis the year prior to that, and David and Hogan and those guys, Bobby Heenan, those guys all went over to WWF that year. Then Vince decided to go nationwide, and and came and got Dynamite Davey, Brett, and Jim. And I was in the second wave of guys, but we happened to have a show in Calgary at the Stampede, the big rodeo thing that year, and they had Hogan come in and all the guys. It was a WWF show, and I was fortunate enough, Stu got me on the card for the WWF, and happened to talk to Hogan. He asked me would I like to come in there, and I said sure. You know, I see these guys on the independent circuit all the time, and they say, well, I can't wait to get picked up by one of the big companies. How long you been in the business? I asked him. Well, 6 months, 8 months, a year. Brother, it took me 12 years. And when I told Hogan said, how come I hadn't called to come there before? I said, I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I was ready, even after 12 years.
You know, I read something, I'm not sure where, and I'm not, that you know, you work independents, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 dates a year, independents all over the country. And you said that based on what you've seen, there are very few, if any, guys running around independents that you think are ready for the big two. Is that right?
This past year, I didn't see any. The year prior to that, the year before, I saw the one guy that I thought really does, and he does have potential, is this Rico Constantino or Tello.
Rico Constantino, yeah.
He's from Las Vegas. I met him through Billy Anderson's guys out around L.A. and San Bernardino, and this guy looks like a young Ricky Martel. He did this Power Team USA stuff where, you know, he's got great body, he works very good, but he ended up going over to getting on the WWF developmental thing in Ohio Valley, and I don't know what's really happened to him since. I wish he would have contacted me, because at that time Bischoff was looking for talent, and maybe I could have pitched him not to Bischoff, but at least to Jimmy Hart.
Have you gotten more calls for independent booking since showing up at the Rumble?
Well, you get calls from people you hadn't heard from or hadn't heard of at all. Some of the guys I hadn't heard from in a couple of years, they called me. Some people I'd never heard of at all started to call. Yeah, that helps get the phone to ring, but you know, there's only a few of us that do this independent thing, and you know, when you tell somebody you do 120, 140 shows a year, they don't really think that that's that much independent going on, but there really is that much independent going on.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a name and you have to have a lot of contacts, and it's got to be really hard, because you're booking all of your shows, you know, yourself. You know, it's instead of someone just giving you a schedule and go, you got to be here, here, and here, and you got to deal with guys of various level of scruples. You know, from people who probably are very honest to people who are absolutely the most dishonest people around.
Well, most of those guys over the years now have been weaned out of the business. They're not around anymore. There's still a couple of them, but not very many. You know, most of them are dead or in jail that did all that unscrupulous activity, or they're just not around anymore. You know, the Tommy D's from New York, and what was that squirrel's name from California that he was going to put Vince out of business and blew himself away with cocaine.
Herb Abrams.
Herb Abrams. He still owes me money. I'll never collect that one. But you know, we got rid of those people. We start charging deposits. I make people send me, you know, either half the money or a plane ticket before I guarantee the date to them, and that, you know, it really constitutes a contract. Plus, it makes them, they're committed on their end. Otherwise, they don't mind canceling. But with only a few of us that do this, they have to treat us pretty good.
So out of 120 dates a year, how many do you think you have a problem with?
Last year, none. I didn't have any problems at all, knock on wood. The year before, I really didn't have any. Sometimes you get a cancellation. I had one kid, Carmine Desperio. He calls me a couple of years ago. He sent me a deposit. His show got canceled. Calls me back. He says, Wayne, I want to rebook this show for another date. Can you use the same deposit? I said, oh, please, Carmine. It doesn't work that way. I'm keeping that money.
Special guest today, the Honky Tonk Man. One of the longest reigning WWF Intercontinental Champions. Maybe the longest. I'm not sure. Do you know, were you the longest?
Yeah, so far it's 15 months has probably been the record. I don't see that being broken anytime soon.
Ever?
No, I don't think so either.
15 days is a long time now.
I know. No one has the patience. One of the things, when you first came to the WWF coming out of Calgary, got a pretty big push on television as a baby face. In fact, you were booked as Hogan's tag team partner in a lot of cities, and immediately the people didn't like you. They went with a heel turn, which turned out to be very, very successful. Any thoughts, like, when you first went out there and after that babyface push and they started booing, were you happy, or did you think that going as a babyface wasn't the right move anyway? Or
well, I knew, and Vince and myself had talked about it prior to me starting there, that he wanted to try it because he had visions of merchandise, and you know, even now he's a merchandising type guy. I'm not going to say what all these other guys say about being a genius. I think he laughs about that when people say that about him. But the merchandising, he had that already in his mind, and that's what he thought would happen. And I just knew that it wasn't going to work because I had tried the thing as a babyface in Mobile and Pensacola, and it wasn't really it's just a gimmick, the Elvis thing that people didn't want to see. I think if there was a black guy, if there was ever a thing that some black kid would want to do is come out and maybe try to emulate or try to copy and be a Martin Luther King type character. And believe me, get heat because no one wants to see some of our heroes duplicated in any way. And, yeah, it was upsetting to go out. I went out, I busted my butt trying to get over. I'd waited 12 years to get to the WWF. I wanted to be there and make some money and do good. And, here these people are just booing me, and the heels in the locker room didn't want to work with me because I was killing off all their heat. So, the turn came naturally. It came swiftly. And, brother, when I got turned, I never looked back.
Now, what was the story? Ricky Steamboat had just beaten Randy Savage for the Intercontinental title in that classic match, and then Steamboat and Vince kind of had a little bit of a problem. I guess Steamboat wanted time off. Vince, I don't know, I guess Vince promised him that and then kind of didn't want to give it to him, and Steamboat still had the belt. How did you end up in that position where you beat Steamboat?
Once again, I came in on it kind of tail end because they were going to go with the natural Butch Reed. And Butch was AWOL at the time, or missing in action, had been gone for 2 or 3 days, and no one could find him, and they thought he would be there at that TV, and he was going to get that belt. I just happened to be walking by, all decked out in one of the flashy Elvis suits. Vince really liked that kind of stuff. He still likes the flashy things. And Hogan looked at me and looked at Vince and said, "Put the belt on. Why don't you put the belt on this guy?" And he calls me over and asked me if he did that, would I run with it? I said, "Brother, give me the ball. I'm going as long as I can."
Wow. That's pretty interesting.
And that's how it happened. I mean, it happened just like that. 20 minutes later, we were in the ring, and 10 minutes after that, I was the Intercontinental Champion.
Now, during that reign, probably the story that's been told, a million times is the night of that Saturday night main event. It was live, and you were supposed to lose to Randy Savage. And what exactly happened there?
Well, gosh, that story's been told a lot, but it was a case of I was doing really, really good with the Intercontinental belt. I was promised this run with Hogan when I first came to WWF. I never got that particular run. That's the kind that can make your career. You're talking about $10,000 a day. We were doing 9 shows a week. You're talking $100,000 a week, and you get that run for 6 months. That's pretty good money, boys. But I was doing okay with the Intercontinental belt. We were sold out in every arena I went to. Myself, everyone wanted to see Savage beat me for the belt, and it was sold out night after night after night. And now they just want to, right in the midst of this, make Savage Intercontinental Champion. But the belt was promised to Ted DiBiase, and I read an interview where he did admit that because I didn't drop the Intercontinental belt, he didn't get to be the WWF World Champion. Instead, he was made the $1 Million Champion. But I just felt like my time hadn't come to lose the belt and lose it that way, and it disturbed me, and I refused to do the job. And I probably paid a price for it later on. I'm sure I did.
Now, in the locker room, I mean, this is a live TV. They have this script. You're not being cooperative in their mind. I mean, what kind of stuff did they do to try to talk you into it? I mean, I heard things were, everybody's trying to figure out some way to convince you to do it, right?
Not really. No, I had a conversation with Vince prior to the show, and it was like a week ahead of time. So they had ample notice that this particular thing, it wasn't going to happen. And it's like I said, my deal with Vince was a handshake deal. If you put me in a position and I draw, pay me. If you put me in that position and I don't draw and I don't sell any tickets, then you can fire me. I'll go home. I'll quit. And so I felt like, hey, if I'm drawing, why stop it? It's like I said, I waited 12 years to get there. I didn't want it cut off after, a few months.
Now, did he kind of understand that, or did he? Because for some reason, I can't see Vince just listening to this guy go, "I'm not going to do your plan," and just going, "Oh, okay, I understand."
Well, they didn't really have a choice because I was splitting. I had already talked to Jim Barnett, and I was headed to WCW with their belt. In fact, there was you guys might remember it. One of the few times I was watching Raw was a couple of years ago, I guess maybe last year, a year ago. Vince was doing the program with Steve Austin, and Vince had the world belt, and I had told Vince this exact same thing. I told him that if he wanted the belt, I would drop it to two people. Hogan, because Hogan brought me to the WWF, and I would drop it to him if he wanted to put his tights on and wrestle me, because it was his company and his belt. But otherwise, if he wanted it, he could come to Memphis and get it to be on the mantle over my fireplace if he thought he could beat me for it.
Now, a couple months later, you ended up losing the belt to Ultimate Warrior in like a minute. What changed your mind at that point? At that point where you'd had 15 months, it was long enough, or
Well, the meeting that I had with Vince and Patterson, myself and Jimmy Hart and Savage was not a really good business meeting for me, because they kind of sat on one side of the room and directed all their attention to Savage. No attention was given to me or Jimmy Hart. Our input wasn't asked or anything. It was like, why are we at this meeting? And then when just at the end of the meeting, they turned and said to me, and after it's all over and Savage drops the elbow on Honky, Jimmy, you pull Honky out of the ring, and then he'll be off camera, not to be seen or heard of again. And that's when Vince looked at me and said, but we're going to repackage you. And I just felt like that wasn't the way for a meeting to go. And a few months later, when we sat down and talked about the Ultimate Warrior situation, it was a real business meeting with two businessmen, and we came to, I think, a proper decision. It really catapulted the Warrior.
In repackaging, did he want to give you a new gimmick and everything?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I was just, I don't know. I mean, I went totally blank at that point to the fact that I didn't want to hear any more of their bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna put it honest. I was ready to get out of there, and I stopped at the corner phone booth. I called my wife. I said, this doesn't look good. Give me Jim Barnett's number, and I'd call the Atlanta office. And brother, I was out of there. Jimmy Hart begged me. Jimmy begged me, please tell Vince, talk to Vince again, please. Don't just up and leave like this. I was leaving, brother. I was gone.
Now, as far as the run in the WWF, how did it end up? You worked with Greg Valentine as a tag team for a while. What led to you leaving? And there was also another time you were in as an announcer. And I'm trying to remember this now. Did you leave as an announcer, and did that set the stage for Lawler to come in?
No, that kind of I don't know. Myself and Piper, they had Piper doing the Superstar show with Vince, and they brought me over to do it. They had let Greg Valentine go. When they put Greg and I together, we were kind of like a tag team in waiting in case the Road Warriors didn't come over to the WWF. And when they got commitment on the Road Warriors, and we were left behind the eight ball. I really thought the rhythm and blues thing was a neat little entertainment. It could have been very good in the middle of the card. With Valentine with his hair black, we were getting a ton of heat out there in the matches we were having. It was good for entertainment value. But we were the kind of the tag team in the shadows, and once they got those guys, we were expendable, so he let Greg go and told me I was going to be transferred over to the TV department. And once I got transferred over there doing the commentary, I didn't mind it, but being around Piper's like Daffy Duck. You can't get a word in edgewise. And the show moved fairly fast, not like the Raw show does now. And of course the matches were back then. You had the heel go out and squash the job boy babyface in 3-4 minutes. You had the babyface star go out and have to go 5 or 6 minutes with a terrible job heel. It was hard to comment on that kind of stuff, but when I was over there, my plane tickets, after all the 300 days a year for 4 years, 1,200 wrestling shows, I never had problems with plane tickets or anything with the WWF. No sooner I get over to the TV department, they only got to book 6 guys and buy 6 plane tickets. I didn't have plane tickets. There was no one. I was supposed to have a car to pick me up and take me to Stamford. I get over there. They don't have any rooms paid for, nothing. It was just like somebody said, okay, let's bring him over here. We'll dump some of this garbage on top of him, and maybe he'll leave. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Now, what happened with Lawler? So you were already gone when Lawler came in?
Yeah, he didn't come in until after they did a reformat on the Raw show, and I think Gorilla was gone, and Bobby Heenan was gone, and all those guys were gone.
Now, you worked for Lawler, and you're actually related to him.
Yeah. Nice guy.
When you started wrestling, did you start in Nashville or did you start in Memphis working with Lawler?
No, I was in what we call them independent now. They were called outlaw territories. I was an outlaw. I broke in with Robert Fuller's uncle. Herb Welch broke myself and Coco B. Wary at the same time. David Schultz had gone in through there the year before, and Spot Moondog. I started in the outlaw territory of southern Missouri, and I was there for over a year before I ever went to Memphis and started working there.
So what's as far as with Lawler, what led to? I mean, were you ever close, or was it just like just a cousin thing, but you weren't close, and what happened?
Yeah, there was never any real closeness, but you would think that if you're in the same business, and normally the families do take care of each other. He definitely didn't. I mean, it even shows with his own sons. He's not taking care of them. It's too bad for Brian Christopher that he's going to have to suffer the sins of the father. But the boy's very talented and would probably do good if the old man was out of there. But he's never going to share the spotlight and let the kid do anything. When he was booking the Memphis territory, he would do stuff like tell me he'd book me one night a week, 400 miles one way to Louisville, $40 payoff. I would go there and make the show and drive back by myself. You couldn't even team up in the car with anybody because I was the only guy going by myself and coming back. And then I said, man, I'm just, it's hard to make these trips. Well, you complaining? If you buy more outfits, I can book you more, which meant more masked outfits. I'd be myself on the first match and, the masked Marvel on one match and the Super Destroyer on another match and then go in a tag match. I worked 4 or 5 times a night. But every time Jerry Jarrett was booking the place and running it, I was taken care of. And it was Jerry Jarrett that always pitted me against Lawler in the angles that we did that made money there.
Now, in '93, I think it is. It's about the right time. What led to you going into WCW with Hogan? And was Hogan there?
Boy, I'm glad you brought that up because I could spend about the next 8 hours talking about Hogan, Bischoff, and that mess they have.
Let's start.
Anyway, quick history on it. Hogan was going there, and Jimmy Hart and didn't want Hogan to go there all alone by himself to try to make some kind of an impact. So they were trying to get a few of us ex-WWF players that would go in and help Hogan with, really to make an impact on the company. And, I agreed to do that and met with Bischoff and the promise of, a contract in November when the money gets freed up and all this nonsense. And I would I just moved to Phoenix and I'd fly to Atlanta, stay over there 2 days, fly back to Phoenix, stay home one day. Come November, the contract never came. Come December, they asked me to do the job for Johnny B. Bad, and I just couldn't do it without a contract. So Bischoff said, well, we can't use you. After all that time and effort they put into me, they didn't even bother to say, well, look, what can we do for tonight, just to do this tonight, and then talk tomorrow maybe. He just said, well, I can't use you.
Just as we were talking about WCW right before the break, in your opinion, is there anything that can be done to salvage WCW? Is it too far gone, or do you have any ideas on what you would do in that situation?
Well, Dave, Bischoff must be one great salesman to be able to sit down with, and I talked to Vince about this at the Rumble, to be able to sit down with some guys and say, listen, I got a heck of a deal for you. This company, they lost about $80 million or $100 million, but we can get it at a bargain, and I can run it for you and turn this thing around. When, in fact, he was the guy that lost that $80 or $100 million. And he's got, that would be the prime interviews to find out who these goofs are that bought this piece of junk. And Vince said he was going to buy it. He was going to buy it and wanted to buy it, but only for the time slots, not for the talent. Just the time slots that they had. But Time Warner, Viacom, I guess, canceled the deal because they felt like that he might put more of his stars on that particular cable show than the one that he was committed to. So they're the one that pulled the plug on it. I don't know what Bischoff says he's going to bring in new people. What planet is this guy living on? Where is he going to get new people? They said, well, he can get them from ECW. If they wanted the ECW guys, they would have got them 6 months ago. They didn't take them. Now Vince has took the only 3 that's left there, and that company, it's pretty much gone. And I tour this country every weekend. There is no independent talent out there. The guys are either trained in hardcore or they learn lucha style. Now they got to be retrained. No one has costumes. No one has real good gimmicks. I don't know what Bischoff, I'm just saying he was the guy. Him and Big Lazy Nash and Hogan and Ric Flair and that bunch, they ruined that company. Flair and them guys, and Dave, I know you like Flair, and I see that you're probably getting on him a little bit now. It's time for him to move on out of there. Brother, they ruined that thing. Those swinging dead four horsemen killed that place 20 years ago, and it will never be any good. It's done. There's nothing you can do. Where are they going to get guys from? You can't take a Billy Kidman, have him beat Hulk Hogan, and make him a star overnight. Vince McMahon, that's the one thing Vince does. I'll give him credit for that. He didn't bring Rocky in, and all of a sudden Rocky's a star, the main event guy, making $15-20 million a year. They groomed this kid and brought him along over a period of about 2 years. Same thing with Stone Cold Steve Austin. I don't know where Bischoff thinks he's going to get talent, but he did a heck of a sales job. He picked Turner's pocket, and now he's picked these guys' pocket.
Well, it's real interesting because it's the deal making seems to be his strong suit. In that he got the job, and got the one thing that he did in like '95 was he got Turner to spend a lot of money on talent in '95, which led to the only successful period they had. The problem is they made long-term commitments to guys that burned out, and then he made a deal here when that company was dying again.
Plus, there were guys available in '95, and everyone now is under contract. They've
structured some of the worst contracts in the history of sports business. You can't guarantee somebody, well, I want to be world champion 3 times. Oh, well, if he's world champion 3 times, I've got to be world champion 4 times. You can't do that. You can't have somebody, well, I only work 100 days a year. Well, I only work 90 days a year. But, you got a guy in a major angle. Well, he can't work today because it's somebody in his family's got. I heard this. Somebody in somebody's family has a birthday, so the guy gets off the day before and the day after. I mean, this is like crazy. But then I hear an interview, and I like Bobby Heenan. Bobby's a friend of mine. Bobby does an interview, and he says, the WCW, what was wrong with it? Just not run by wrestling people. Well, who the heck was Flair, Arn Anderson, Terry Taylor, Bischoff, Hogan, Dusty Rhodes, Mike Graham, Greg Gagne, Jim Ross, and Jimmy Cornette ran that company one time. If these aren't wrestling people, who the hell are they?
Let's go to Chris in Long Island for the first caller. Chris, what's going on?
Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
Hi, Honky. I grew up watching you, and I remember hating you as a kid, so I guess that was a good thing.
Well, I guess I did my job.
You definitely did. I couldn't stand you when you beat Steamboat for the title at the time, because as a kid, he was one of my favorites. So it's kind of an honor to talk to you. I had one question, a few questions actually. Recently, I heard you on a few other radio shows about Billy Gunn, how they were calling you a career killer and everything, and you said that he didn't want to listen to instruction. Basically, whose choice was it to team him with you, and how doesn't he take the advice that's given to him to try and propel his career? What is it that he's so hard-headed about?
What are your thoughts on Billy overall?
Yeah,
I don't know. I might not be good at anything, but I can at least recognize and know when somebody's talented. And obviously, from the reports I've been reading on the internet, I don't watch the shows, but Billy's not faring too well as a single wrestler out there, and he's not getting good reviews. I don't think Dave's giving him 4 stars on any of his matches. So
not lately.
But, He's really kind of a hothead, and he doesn't want to listen to anybody. And why he didn't want to listen to me, I don't know. It wasn't my choice to have him. I wouldn't have had him because him and the Road Dogg were trading off opening match jobs for 6 months before I ever came there. They should have put me with someone new that was coming, some new guy they wanted to bring in. The Brian Christopher would have been good. He was a new kid. If they knew they were going to bring him in or someone else and do it that way, or bring me back, put me in the ring, let me do the job for the Rookie of the Year sensation, the Rocky, and catapult him, something that way. The Billy Gunn, Rockabilly thing, I'm going to tell you, a lot of people might know it. Savio Vega was the first choice they were going to use. They were going to make him the Puerto Rican Elvis or something.
Oh, really? I never heard that.
Are you serious?
I mean, I don't know where that came from. It wasn't a Vince Russo thing. I can know that because he was too busy trying to, make sure he got a look at Sable's chest.
Was there ever any talk of bringing Disco Inferno in that role?
No, never was.
Okay.
Would you have, if you had your choice to take somebody else, and you did take a guy like Brian Christopher, would you have given him the Rockabilly gimmick or a gimmick like that, or did you not even like that gimmick at all?
I thought it was. I didn't particularly like the gimmick. It was not good. It was just not a good gimmick. I don't know. I really don't know. I didn't spend a lot of time with it. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it because that's something. When things don't work, I don't worry about why they didn't work too much or what I could have done to have changed them because There was nothing I could do about it. It was just the whole thing drug on way too long. It went on for about 4 months or so, and it was nonsense. I mean, I got nothing out of it other than people saw me back on TV again, and I don't think the WWF got anything out of it.
And I've also heard you talk about Jeff Jarrett, how you basically don't like him, or at least you don't like the fact how he's using that guitar.
To me, it's a lack of professionalism.
Okay.
But just because the gimmick's too similar to yours with the guitar?
Yeah, I don't see anybody going around with a snake around their neck calling themselves a snake man, or nobody's blowing the bagpipes and saying that they're, an Irishman from Ireland or any of those things. I just think Jarrett had tried the gimmick earlier. They brought him in with the WWF to do it. He came behind one of the Armstrong kids, a singing cowboy or something. They tried to fill my shoes with some Lance Cassidy, the singing cowboy. That was a flop. Then they bring Jarrett and make him a country music singer with a guitar. It was a flop for him. He goes to WCW. It's unfortunate. Obviously, the kid can't understand how to get over. They stick him with this girl, Deborah. Now, the first thing you do is get rid of the girl. If I had one thing to tell Scott Steiner right now, it's to get rid of the girls, brother. You don't need them. Let those people look at you, not the girl with the big chest. So anyway, he's stuck with a girl. His career goes nowhere. He goes back to the WWF, and he goes back for the guitar gimmick again. Now, all he had to say was, look, take this guitar and shove it, folks. I don't want this thing. It's killing me. Because you just can't copy those. Our gimmicks in the 80s, in the late 80s and early 90s were over so strong around the world that anybody who tries to copy them or duplicate them, they might as well forget it. They're dead. And Jarrett's dead.
So is that all that you really have against him, or is it just the fact that he won't let go of that gimmick?
That's all. There's nothing personal. It's all business. I mean,
okay.
To me, it's a lack of professionalism and professional courtesy. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go in the locker room. If someone's in the WWF or the WCW and they brought me in and said, what kind of gimmick would you want? And I look around the room and I just picked one and started dressing like Stone Cold or talking or acting like Rocky or doing the Chris Jericho thing. That's not good. It's not in good professional taste.
What if somebody had at least, if Jarrett had come up or had called you or something and said, look, they want me to do this gimmick. Would you mind if I do it? I don't want you to think I'm ripping you off. Would you have then had a better feeling about the fact that he at least had the respect to come to you and say, look, this is what I'm going to do. Do you mind?
No, I would have told him the same thing. Don't do it because, it's a death wish for you. Just by looking at the first kid they had, the singing cowboy gimmick they had prior to that, he should have said, no, it's not going to work. And then when it didn't work for him the first time, that's when you really do can it. I mean, you can it then and you forget about it. Now he does it in WCW. They do it all the time. He's not dressed like any kind of person from the music business. He does nothing that has anything to do with the music business. And you can't insult people's intelligence with, that nonsense stuff where they hit a guy over the head 10 times a night. We did that. I used the guitar 5 times on TV in about 4 years.
Yeah, it meant something back then. Now it's like a headlock, it just happens all the time, so nobody cares.
Well, that's why it meant something, is you never did it.
Yeah.
The whole thing is like, it's a hard crowd and it's an easy pop. Big explosion, things fall everywhere, so people will pop. But then you start relying on that, and it doesn't. And then when you do it every show, it doesn't mean anything.
I really believe that you can tell when someone, and for all the young wrestlers out there that might be listening, I tell them this on the Independent, you have to find that gimmick or that thing that you can do, that you really believe in, that you can look into the camera, and you can talk about it, you can sell it to these people no matter what it is, and you believe in it, and you can do it because in most cases, the gimmick really is the man. I mean, it really is the man. And you have to believe in it. And you see, I can spot a guy on TV who doesn't believe in his gimmick. I can spot a guy on TV who is not comfortable doing what he does.
It has to be like an extension of that person's personality.
It really does have to be, yeah. Right? You have to be comfortable with that role you're playing.
Right. My last question is actually about, did you ever get a chance to read the Dynamite Kids book?
No, I never did. I wouldn't, and I probably wouldn't because I could care less about his book.
Do you know of the story that he kind of told about you in the locker room regarding something that had to do with supposedly you had made a comment about Harley Race, some sort of joking comment about a paycheck you had that at the time Harley Race wasn't getting paid, and supposedly you said something about Harley Race, who Dynamite is close with, and he claims he threw you up against the locker and scared you and did all of this, and had you in tears and this and that. I just wanted to know if you knew that story.
No, that's not the case. I was never thrown against a locker by anyone, and he never scared me. And the comments that were made about Harley Race was made by Bobby Heenan, not by me. It had nothing to do with anything. He was drunk and obnoxious and yelling and screaming, and that's all he did. And I lost total respect for him because I'd been with him in Calgary for 3-4 years, at WWF for a year, and no, it was done in another locker room where nobody was there but he and I.
Okay.
So there's his side of the story, there's my side, and probably there's the truth.
Okay. All right, I appreciate the time, and thanks for taking the call.
Okay.
Thanks a bunch, Chris. This is an email from Tony Aragona, and he's asking you your opinion on the following wrestlers that you worked with. We already talked about Lawler. David Schultz. Actually, they're not all wrestlers. One's a promoter. David Schultz, Nick Goulas, Bad News Allen, and Larry Latham.
Gosh, I'll start with Nick Goulas. Probably the worst payoff man in the history of the business. But everyone knows that. I compared, I even said, said something to Vince one time about having to chase Nick Goulas for my money, but I never thought I'd have to chase. I said, Vince, I didn't think I'd ever have to chase you for it, because we were having a dispute over money. And I also said something that's too hard about Nick Goulas one time, and oh gosh, it really raises dandruff when you make a comparison to promoters about Nick Goulas. But Nick taught me something that has worked out very well for me, and I'll use this on all the young guys and anybody else out there. It really is life itself. Nick paid me $20 for a match. I think it was getting like $150 for the week or something, and $100 for the week. And I said, Nick, I just can't. I can't live on this. How do you expect a guy to live on $20? He looked at me and he said, son, it's not what you make, it's what you save. So that's been my motto all the way through now, and that kept me going even in those dismal days when I had long trips and made no money. David Schultz, we rode together and was together a lot. David was very talented, extremely talented. It was his idea for WrestleMania. It was his idea for Mr. T, Hulkamania. A lot of that came from David Schultz. Great interview guy, very talented. A little bit too much of a hothead on the promoters, a little bit too much of a bully on them. Probably cost him his career. Hogan had a lot to do with it, stabbed him in the back. Larry Latham, a great talent. Larry, not a talker. He always had to have a manager or a partner with him, but very good in the ring, real Southern style wrestling, and could do hardcore. You know, we created hardcore with the Tupelo, Mississippi thing anyway. But Bad News Allen, another very talented. And when I mentioned Martin Luther King earlier as somebody who might want to do that gimmick as a black person, if they would have made Bad News like the Martin Luther King black guy, and he was supposed to beat Hogan for the belt. That was a true story, and I read his interview. He was promised beating Hogan to be the first black champion in the WWF. I think it would have been tremendous. I think he would have had that kind of a heat that Nikolai and Iron Sheik had. A real serious sell-out business heat, but they didn't do it, and it's too bad, because Allen's a great guy.
You know, this Kieran Shea actually asked about the match in the Tupelo match. A lot of people probably don't remember it. It was about 79. You and, what was it, Larry Latham against, was it Lawler and Dundee?
Lawler and Dundee, yeah.
Yeah.
And Danny Davis was our manager. He's in the Ohio Valley thing now.
Yeah, so that was, it was the famous Tupelo concession stand brawl that they replayed on Memphis television for probably 10 straight years.
Right, that actually created ECW because of Eddie Gilbert as a young boy, as a Mark fan, being there with his dad, Tommy. Tommy Gilbert was on the card, and Eddie saw that, and when Eddie got into the wrestling business, he eventually met Paul E., and then that's how ECW kind of got started, along with that Joel, he owes me money, good heart, too.
Yeah, you know, in fact, another thing that spawned from that is one of the, about 2 years later or so when Eddie Gilbert started wrestling, Eddie Gilbert and Ricky Morton did a similar brawl. I think it was in Tupelo, too, with Onita and Masafuchi, and that's where Onita got the idea, and he went to Japan and made a ton of money with the FMW, you know, doing the brawling. Because they'd never done...
I was in Tampa, I think, at the time when Onita and Fuchi were there in Memphis. So it, you know... It's not that, you know, kids look at me and say, well, Honky, you don't take any bumps, you don't do this. Hey, brother, when you've been around for 20 years, you should learn how not to have to take those bumps. Our thing is manipulation of the crowd for the time that you're out there. And if you can't do that, and you have to do it by flipping off the top rope and having four guys on the floor catch you, and I always said about the lucha stuff, when that guy goes up and does a 1.5 gainer off the top turnbuckle and I'm supposed to stand there, I mean, what if you just backed up and said, heck, I'm not catching this guy?
How are you doing injury-wise?
I've been fortunate so far. I mean, King Kong Bundy bruised my ribs on Saturday night over in Pennsylvania, but other than that, gosh, but he's 400 pounds. You got to accept it, I guess.
Yeah. How was the deal as far as, I guess it was kind of almost a last-minute thing, you going to the Royal Rumble?
Yeah, it came up on I was speaking with Jimmy Hart on a Tuesday. Prior to that, I'd read the internet on Tuesday morning or Monday or something. It said Jimmy Hart was in the hospital, so I called Jimmy's house to find out what the heck happened to him. We only speak once every 2 or 3 months, and we never really talk. We never talk about business. Jimmy never tells me anything about the business anyway, so we talk socially. But I'd talked to him, and then I hung up the phone from him on Tuesday afternoon. And then the last thing I said to him is, I said, Jimmy, you just never know when the phone's going to ring again. You're only one shot away from that NFL contract, one motion picture away from your next Oscar award. You just never know. Or in his case, I said another hit record. The following day about noon, Jim Ross called me. It was like on a Wednesday, I think, and asked me would I be interested in working the Rumble. I didn't know where it was. I told him that I had a show, an autograph session in New Orleans for a monster truck guy on a Friday, and he said, well, that's where we are. Would you mind staying over? I said, no, I'd be glad to. And that's the question is this, and Tom Brandy brought this up to me. I said, I don't know why they call me. I don't know what they call me for. I figured because I was doing all these commentaries on the Internet, and I've had some pretty good little commentaries knocking a few people, that they were bringing me in to punish me, keep you in the ring in the Rumble for about 45 minutes or an hour. It's a real punishment. It's nothing to enhance your drawing power. It's strictly punishment. But they didn't do that. But as Tom said, the question is, who brought your name up? In what meeting? And when did they bring your name up? And why? And it really is a question. Who brought my name up? And I don't know. It really doesn't matter.
I never heard. And I was, I was surprised that day when I heard. It was like, where did this come from?
Yeah, and it was a good little pop for the crowd. And I read Internet reports where the crowd didn't know who the Honky Tonk Man was. Well, they must have a short memory. I was just there 2 years ago. Yeah. I was there for a year and a half 2 years ago.
That's true.
What was your thoughts when you first heard about Vince McMahon starting the XFL?
Oh, gosh. I thought like a lot of people. Football, they have the arena thing. They have the World League, NFL, when they're going to play it. What time slots, what TV. I didn't really think it's going to be such a big hit. There's probably a spot for it on television. Prime time, I don't think so. They were probably dead in the water without Dick Ebersol jumping in bed with them. And now that he has, it'll keep them alive. But normally Vince will promise something, he delivers on it. But on this one, he hasn't been able to really deliver that hard-hitting, behind-the-scenes, no-nonsense football, and they really should keep the wrestling out of it. Jim Ross is not a bad commentator for football at all, but he's associated with wrestling. He keep wrestling out of it. Jesse Ventura, Dick Ebersol is probably those guys are living in the past. Jesse was great doing wrestling when he could do it and not try to be politically correct. Now he's trying to be at least politically correct on the football side. You got to understand, he's the governor of Minnesota. He can't be saying and bashing people. I could go there and bash a lot of people. I could bash those players from here to hiatus, but Jesse can't do that. So they're not getting their bang for the buck out of Jesse. He's got to be politically correct. And so I just haven't seen anything that makes this league, makes people want to tune into it other than, the curiosity factor that happened the first week.
How long do you think it'll last?
Well, as long as Vince has got it on TV, and as long as he's got a network to carry it, he's going to stay with it, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of NBC, between
and that's going to be the major thing. But then Vince he'll put it on another station. Someone else will pick it up because all these cable stations need programming.
The only thing is, though, is that the drop from NBC to TNN. It'll come off just on minor league. Yeah,
but it's already happened anyway. So that's neither here nor there. It's a matter of not sinking a ton more money into it or just let it ride and see what happens. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm sure that, Vince is racking his brain on it. He don't want to come up a loser on this deal because then it sets a pattern that he can't do anything outside of wrestling, which doesn't send it's not a good signal to Wall Street. Once again, I didn't know who the people were that bought the stock anyway, so.
Well, I mean, not just Wall Street, but Vince himself, because I think Vince himself wants to be known as a great promoter rather than just a guy who was a wrestling promoter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, and he probably can because he's very innovative, and he does things first class, and he does things the right way, and he surrounds himself with the right people. That's why I said he probably laughs when all his stooges and people that work for him, or people who want to work for him, call him a genius. He probably laughs about that. So I'm not going to go so far as to call him a genius. Dave, you're probably the genius of this whole bunch. I mean, it's most ironical. You've probably had more impact on two wrestling companies than anybody in this business. I mean, you actually had the booking committee, which was Jim Ross and Jim Cornette, and those guys in the WCW was reading the Observer and booking their matches according to what you said. And we were in the WWF, and of course, you didn't really care so much about the WWF back then that the Observer was banned from the locker rooms. We had to go into the restrooms or read it in the confines of the back of the building where no one would see us reading it in fear that we would be fired or reprimanded because we had the Wrestling Observer and looking at it. So, and then ironically, you showed up on TV sitting beside Vince McMahon at the Donahue show.
Didn't Howard Finkel get in big trouble one day for reading it?
I don't know what to say. It was never, no one ever told us not to read it, but it was kind of implied. It was like, don't get caught reading that thing. And
you know what they used to do? You know what they used to do on the airplanes is that they would get a magazine and they would stick it inside the magazine so everybody looked like you were reading like Time Magazine or Newsweek.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure it still is, and then at that time it was the most read newsletter in the history of this business.
Well, it was the first
still
one.
Is.
So you probably had more of an impact. You were booking both companies at one time, whether you knew it or not.
I wish I was. They always do the opposite. Somebody used to tell me, why don't you just put in the Observer the dumbest ideas possible, so then when they do the opposite, at least they'll be good ideas.
Boy, I'll tell you, that was something, And then again, but the business has changed a little bit. We weren't allowed to read George Napolitano's or Bill Apter's magazines either. They weren't allowed in the locker room, only WWF material. And boy, things have really changed.
Boy,
why were the Apter magazines banned?
They were banned from the building. They couldn't even take pictures of us. If we posed for a picture and it looked like we posed for a picture, it was like, there again, it was like getting caught with the Observer.
Well, you got to remember in the 80s, Vince's design was to take over every aspect of the business, and one of the first things he targeted was the magazines. And it wasn't a personal thing, but he just wanted, all those magazines. When he started his own magazine, it was like he was going to run every magazine out of business, and it didn't quite happen. What's funny is that 5 years ago, it was kind of like one of those things where, Vince, at one point he probably controlled 80-90% of the whole business, and then WCW came along and got strong, and we were kind of thinking like, no one's ever going to control the whole business, and now here we are, 2001, and it's like, a year from now he may control the whole business.
Yeah, it does make a circle. Fortunately for the magazine people, the Nitro was a good avenue for them to sit at ringside and be around ringside taking pictures. So WWF was literally forced, I guess, to give press passes to Apter and George.
Yeah, but then when they got the upper hand, it's they start setting the rules again.
Oh yeah, well that's normal though. I mean, I've always said that the WWF is like a dandelion. You can chop them down, but you give them a little water and sunshine, they'll sprout right back up.
Yeah. Let's go to Henry in Arkansas. Henry, what's going on?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey.
It's going good.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh.
Honky Tonk Man, first I'd like to say thank you for such an entertaining gimmick and character. I want to know, who is your favorite person to work with?
Oh, gosh, there were so many. I get asked that a lot. Jake was good, very good. Jimmy Snuka was very good. Ricky Steamboat, I probably had the best matches with, but if Ricky would have came back and gave me some return matches when I was when I was Intercontinental Champion, probably would have been better for me and probably for the whole for everyone involved. I had good matches with Savage. It wasn't great Personally, being around him, I think he's been overrated as the worker that a lot of people say he is.
Mm-hmm.
He's very repetitious, kind of like, I don't want to say this, Dave, but he's very much like Ric Flair and Bret Hart. He's very repetitious, does the same thing in every match. But I got the most out of matches with Snuka, Steamboat, and Jake Roberts. But there's been tons of guys I've worked with through the years that just phenomenal guys in the ring that never achieved the level of success they probably should have.
What are your thoughts on Hogan nowadays?
I'll tell you this. Someday, somewhere, I'll see him again. Someday, somewhere, I will see Hogan. And I'm going to call him out. It's just that simple. I really am.
Really?
I almost feel the same way about Bischoff. Bischoff lives here in Phoenix. Phoenix is not a real big city. And I'm going to run across him someday, too.
As far as Hogan, what's the heat there?
I just felt like that I went to the WCW to help Hogan, and I told this to him, that I came here for you. I didn't come here for these guys. I didn't come for Ric Flair or Arn Anderson or any of those guys. I came for you. And I said, it looks like there's no plans for me, and what's your role in this? And all he said was, I'm only here to serve. There's nothing else I can do. He said, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. I said, you're right, and you're not the man.
Yeah.
And he was in a position to say, look, Eric, you promised the guy a contract, or, this guy's a friend of mine, or whatever the case might be. That's the thing. To me, this is the thing that has hurt Hogan all the way through, and it's really hurt him now in his last years of the business. I say his last years because I think he's finished. He's got one foot in the grave. He's as close to a dead man as you can be. He didn't surround himself. Now, I've got to give Ric Flair this. Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and all the guys that were bookers, Dave, and you know this, the bookers always had a clique or a little group around them, and wherever they went, they carried their friends with them. And they kept those friends together. Ric Flair still has all of his friends together with him in WCW. That makes him a force to have to be dealt with. Dusty always had his group of guys around him. Hogan never had that. Hogan only had Beefcake. That was it. And so when power struggles come along, things like the Kidman deal and Hogan not getting the promotion he thought he deserved from Russo and those guys, that would never have happened if he'd had 5, 6 of his guys there and all in top-slotted positions. He would have been in a position to hold power. So he never did that, and consequently, believe me, out here on the independent circuit, with the 4 or 5 or 6, 8 guys that we have out here, there's no loyalty to Hogan. None of us. So I hear these stories about, Hogan's going to start another wrestling company. Where's he going to get talent? You think I'd work for him? Brother, he'd have to send me one hellacious signing bonus, then I wouldn't show up.
Another question, Honky. I was wondering, when can we expect to see you in the Northeast Arkansas, Memphis area again? Because I'd love to see you work in person.
Oh, I don't know. If I ever get by, I still have some family and people over around that area, but they can't afford to fly me there. I've not been over that way to call them up and say, hey, I'm going to be in town and work for those guys over there. There's just no independent guys that run and can afford to bring guys in, and so I wouldn't say in the near future. I don't have anything planned on my books between now and May, so don't look for it before then.
And I have one last question. I heard you guys talking about him earlier. I was just wondering, where is Tom Brandy right now?
Tom does his normal independence. He does his 60, 80, 100 shows a year.
Oh, my God.
He does the Salvatore Sincere gimmick, which I thought was a great little gimmick with the Italian thing that he did. Mm-hmm. And I since helped him do a Patriot thing where he does the Patriot thing out in these towns, and it's worked out really good because we do a lot of military bases. In fact, I'm leaving next Saturday to go to the South Pacific for a month and just do military bases.
Wow.
Well, for what company is that for?
It's not a company. It's through the USO.
Oh, okay.
Is Tom Shea still running?
I got Billy Anderson hooked up on it. Billy out of California, San Bernardino, where he trains wrestlers. He's taking some guys, and Malaya Osaka, some other girl, myself, one-man gang, and what's Big Sam? All I know him is Big Sam, the original head shrinker.
Oh, Sam
in Hawaii.
Yeah, Big Sam's going. So we got a good crew going, and it's going to be fun.
Okay, anything else, Henry?
No, I love your show. Listen to it every day, and keep up the good work, guys.
Okay, let's go to Charles in Pittsburgh. Well, let's go to a break first, then we'll come back with Charles. Okay, we're going to go to Charles? Okay, well, let's go to Charles. Okay. Charles, what's up?
Hey, Dave, what's going on? Hey, Honky, I just had a question for you.
Okay.
I read a report where you did the Between the Ropes radio, and I just wanted to get your comment on the cruiserweights, because I heard that you didn't feel that the short guys could really draw money or anything. I just wanted to get your comments on that.
Well, yeah, I picked up a little heat about that, and I want to say this to all the guys out there that's under 6 foot tall. I didn't mean it to be a knock on you or a knock on anybody that's in the cruiserweight division. It's a good part of having them on the card. Believe me, it's a good part of having those guys on the card to fill in the slots, and the card should be made up of a multitude of people. I mean, sheiks, freaks, and geeks, as far as I'm concerned, and be very entertaining. I'm from the entertainment side of this business. I'm not a technical wrestler, but history has shown that wrestling is like a supernatural hero type thing. We're bigger than life, and average size, normal size guys, and I say normal because average size guys, what they say, 5'10", 155, 165 pounds. A cruiserweight is never going to work in the main event at Madison Square Garden or WrestleMania against the Big Show or ever against God bless him, Andre the Giant. He's never going to be, Stone Cold. Austin is probably the shortest guy that they've had in a long time that made it as the WWF World Champion. It's just something that they don't do.
Yeah, Angle.
Bigger guys are the guys that I think people really come to watch these big, ferocious, gigantic people, pound on each other. I don't think they really care about seeing guys at the same size as your neighbor.
Yeah, and
it's not a knock on the cruiserweights. I'm telling you, it's not. But you see what they did with them. I think in WCW, they had Steiner go out and just kill them all. But obviously somebody's booking WCW must have heard something I said. I would take this Scott Steiner and I would make him an absolute killer. I'd make him a killer.
That is what they're trying to do.
I'd spotlight that body of his, and I'd make this guy a killer. I'd have him squeezing guys till their eyes pop out.
The only problem is they have no one to put him against. The only one they had is Goldberg, and they never can get him going after.
After Kevin Nash beat him. The first guy I'd say was, okay, Nash, look, brother, you're getting this $1.5 million contract, and here's what you're going to do tonight. Well, I'm not doing it. Okay, fine, you're out of here. So we saved $1.5 million. Hogan, you're on a $4 million deal. Listen, here's what we got for you tonight. Scotty Steiner's going to squeeze you, and you're going to bite the Alka-Seltzer. It's going to drip out of your mouth. You remember that old angle, Dave?
Yeah.
And he's going to squeeze the life out of you. Oh, I'm not doing it. Well, we just saved $4 million, pal. You're out of here. and if you can't do any worse. You're already doing. You don't have any ratings anyway. You're going to have to do something. You got to build somebody, and they need to build this guy. And they need to rebuild Goldberg down there because he was it was just incredible. That's the one time I did talk business with Jimmy Hart. I called him. I said, Jimmy, I cannot believe this. I can't believe you guys let this happen. I can't believe it happened. You killed the one guy that people wanted to watch. I turned in to watch this guy. I was a mark for him. I wanted to see who was going to be next.
Mm-hmm.
Just incredible how they killed that business.
That whole thing. They didn't know what they.
Period.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't know what they had. It snuck up on them, and then it was just it got so big so fast.
It was jealousy.
Of course it was.
That was jealousy there. That wouldn't have happened in the WWF.
From all of them, it was one of those things. I mean, the minute he got the belt, if you remember that time period, the minute he got the belt, all of a sudden he got moved to the semi-main events with the belt, and Hogan became and that's when he started going down. And then when Nash beat him, the bloom was totally off the road.
Well, I guess Nash had gotten over in the booking committee and was in charge of booking, so the first match he booked was him winning the world belt. But to me, and then you hear, like I said, when Bobby says the business not run down there by wrestling people, it's the wrestlers that kill that place.
Yeah. Well, the problem is when you got active wrestlers that are headline wrestlers, they're going to book to make themselves headline wrestlers. And Nash, Nash's big thing was if he could be the first one to beat Goldberg with a feather in his cap, so that's the first thing he did. And then, he cut his deal with Hogan and dropped the belt to Hogan right away afterwards. So Hogan got what he wanted. Nash got what he wanted. And they killed Goldberg dead.
The sad thing about that whole situation there in the WCW, and I don't know if it'll change, is the reason they did what they did, they didn't have to answer to anyone for their paychecks. Whether it be Bischoff, whether it be the booking committee, whether it be the TV people, no one had to answer to anyone for their paycheck. And that's essentially what happened to that company.
Tomorrow on the show, we're going to have Rick Bassman of Ultimate Pro Wrestling. We'll be talking about his show, which is on the 21st. And on Friday, we're going to have Jim Herd from WCW. You never worked for Jim Herd, did you?
No, that was the conversation I had with Jim Barnett, and Jim Herd was in. How did that go? It was Jimmy Crockett. Then Jim Herd came along, and Jim Herd went on vacation or something, or I forget how. Anyway, Jim Herd got dismissed from the company somehow, and I missed him. And this Kip Fry came along, and he was working with Jake's contract, got Jake a deal, called me and said he was going to start on mine. They fired him and brought in Bill Watts, and I knew I was dead there, so that was it for me in WCW. I just kind of missed out on a few things, but I don't know. I guess it all worked out. I just heard you plug Bassman and the UPW. I did the Fox Sports Net, or what is it called? Fox FX, where we did the Tough Man.
Oh, the Tough Man contest. That's right. You were the manager of the team,
the Fox wrestlers against football players. And they used Bassman's group out of California. And while we were doing this thing, I told them, I said, somebody from the WWF is going to see you guys on here, and a couple of you get a contract. Well, it didn't happen that way, but WWF, shortly after that show aired, and that's the highest rated show that they have on that station at that time slot, ended up, I guess, getting in bed with those guys, and they're like a farm club on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me wonder about the Royal Rumble, because that particular show played on the Friday night prior to them calling me on the Wednesday.
Oh, the rerun of it. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the rerun. The thing runs about once or twice a month, and I get a lot of publicity off of that. People see me, when I go out and do these shows now. Hey, I saw you on that Tough Man. I saw you on Tough Man. So it's that's been a big boost.
Matt Vasgersian does the announcing on the Tough Man. I don't know if he did it on that show, but he did it on a lot of them.
Yeah, a great concept. They gave it a show away in Detroit. It cost about $600,000 to put it on that night and do all of it. It was a great show, good atmosphere. Had about 8,000 people. It went a little bit long, up till about midnight. The thing they did though was really, really, nice little twist on cutting edge. Football against pro wrestlers, pro football. So you think you're going to see Emmett Smith and Troy Aikman and
yeah, I know.
And all these guys, and you think you're going to see The Rock, and you're going to see Stone Cold, and then they announce the football players. No one knows any of them. Lawrence Taylor's the only guy they know on football because he's doing commentary.
He's
and then
they announce
the wrestlers. Boy, the place is getting ready, and they're rumbling. Here, out comes these guys. They don't know any of them. And then I was the last guy to go out, so I got a big round of applause and eruption from the crowd because I was over real good in Detroit anyway. So other than myself and the other and the football Lawrence Taylor, no one on that show was known at all. So it's been a case of people tune in to watch it because they really think they're going to see something.
Now this is I'm not sure if you even worked for this group, but this Richard Sullivan's asking. Do you have any stories about the Knoxville group that Flair Mulligan and Jim Crockett owned? I know that Mulligan, Les Thatcher, and Kevin Sullivan ran the company.
Yeah, that was a good one. Jack left. Jack Mulligan takes over this thing, brings Kevin Sullivan, myself and Kevin. We left Memphis as part of the Jimmy Hart's original first family of wrestling, and we came over to Knoxville. And Kevin's going to do the booking for Jack, and Jack's there for a couple of weeks. In fact, that's where Barry started. Barry Windham was his first matches there. Terry Taylor's first matches were there before he was a Red Rooster. Can you imagine a guy in WCW taking a finish or having Terry Taylor, the Red Rooster, tell you to do something? Please. Look, here's how I think you can really get over. Oh, come on, Rooster, you never got over. Anyway, Jack leaves
that's
and
actually
goes
what they
to
say
Japan.
behind his back.
Jack leaves and goes to Japan, and the business just falls to nothing. Crockett was supposed to send us some help over from Charlotte with the big key players over there. He never did. So then Jack gets back. The towns are terrible, and he doesn't have the money to pay us. And he says, will you guys just stick with me for a few weeks? I can't afford to pay you. I said, Jack, if you can't afford to pay me, brother, I can't afford to stay.
Yeah.
But anyway, it stayed. That's what happened. That's where I met Dave Ebner in the very beginning, and his brother Earl. They were Dave was the referee, and Earl was pulling the ring in their old school bus.
This is an email about the scene when you were in Wrestling with Shadows in the car with Bret Hart, Davey Boy, and Jim Neidhart talking about Shawn Michaels and everything. What was that? Was that scene actually like right before Montreal?
Yeah, it was the day before. That happened. We went over to the TSN studios. Once again, I came in on the back end. Owen, God bless him, great guy. He's the best of all that bunch. Owen was to go with Davey and Brett and Jim, and Davey, Brett, and Owen were going to do an interview about the Harts and the Hart family and wrestling, and Brett had his own interview to do there. It was a 2-segment deal. Owen had to go do some PR work for the office somewhere else and couldn't make it. So I was just standing there, once again, standing around like somebody didn't know what he was doing. They said, you used to work for the Harts, didn't you? Yeah. Get in the car and go with them. Do this interview. What kind of, just go. And the film crew was in the car, and that's how that all happened.
What were your thoughts as far as what was in the conversation that night? Because that's right before Montreal. Were they talking about a screw job? Was Brett real adamant about anything, or was it not even something they were worried about?
No, it was never brought up in the car or around me at all. There was nothing said about it. Brett was excited he was disgusted about the way the WWF was going and maybe his chances in WCW and all that. And I just come out of the WCW like the year before that or so, and I knew that and I told him, you're going there on a contract, everything's fine, everybody's under contract, there's no pressure, no one cares. I mean, there is no pressure, no one cares there. You just go there and collect a big paycheck, and it doesn't matter, nobody bothers you. But anyway, the thing was, him and Shawn Michaels had already 3 or 4 weeks before that in Hartford, Connecticut, were down on the floor in a locker room and pulling each other's hair out. I mean, fighting. And they pulled those guys apart like 3 weeks before that. And
that was several months before, but yeah, it was in Hartford.
Well,
that's right.
It was. I didn't know exactly what the time frame was. It's fresh in my mind. It was Hartford, Connecticut. But anyway, I know Brett. I know Brett's not going to do the job in the middle of the ring for anybody. I don't care whether it's Canada or where. He never does that. He never did it. And I knew just personality-wise that Shawn Michaels wasn't going to do the job for Bret Hart. So, I mean, you got 2 guys there just not going to cooperate. So, I think Vince, for the good of the company, for the good of his own benefit and his company, he probably did the best thing. Was to do it that way or just cancel the match. So you go out and have the match. I mean, it's nothing new in our business. People get the old Steely Dan up the backside all the time.
Well, at this point, do you think Brett was cool with the idea of just going to WCW and just getting a paycheck?
No, Brett's not that kind of guy. Brett's a real professional. He was, he knew he could make an impact there. And not only that, they were taking a major player. Here's Brett in the main event at a major pay-per-view for the WWF.
The world champion.
And within, 48 hours, he was going to be on Nitro. So, it was a big deal. And they had contacted Anvil, and then Shane McMahon had pulled Anvil off to the side after Brett had smacked Vince. The next day we were in one of those Ontario towns or somewhere, but he had called him off the side, offered him a big contract to stay because Anvil was involved in the main event also, and then Rick Rude was involved in it. So you got all these key players in your main event that 24 hours later they're showing up at your competition's TV.
Yeah, but WCW didn't know what to do when they had him.
Well, now, Dave, you got to remember, it's not run by wrestlers. They're not wrestling people. Who knows? Who knows what they did? They stumbled over stuff and ruined it.
Did guys talk to you after the Montreal show about boycotting Raw the next night?
No, it was never came up that I know of. I heard a little scuttlebutt about it in the locker room. I was dressing beside Brett that afternoon, and Rick Rude was across the way, and I left. I didn't have anything to do, and shortly after the show started, I called a cab, went to the hotel, drove to the town the next day, and see these guys. Everybody's all humble and somber, and I walk up to Jim Ross, and I'm chirping, want to say hello, and I said, "Hey, what'd you boys do last night anyway?" And he looked at me like, "Hey, what are you trying to? Am I a smart ass or what?" But I didn't know they did anything. Rick Rude pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, man, Brett, he beat up Vince last night. What? Oh, you're kidding. Nah. He told me the whole story. He was in there when it happened. And it happened just like all the reports say. If you don't get out of here by the time I put my pants on, I'm going to knock you down. And he did.
Yeah. Were you shocked?
Here's a guy that, if the reports are true, you got a 20-year deal for $2 million a year. That's $40 million. What do you want to beat your boss up over? He's giving you $40 million.
Yeah, because he reneged on it. He had a 20-year deal, and then a year into the deal, Vince goes, remember that 20-year deal?
It was supposed to be like a 20-year deal at $2 million, and that made Sean mad. So, now I hear that Sean's going back to the WWF, and
Sean's going back, yeah.
I can just see that, probably Nash got a hold of Sean and said, hey, look, Eric's coming in. We're going to get this thing going. Come back and go with us. And, he's probably talks to Hunter, and then, Hunter's not being treated very well right now. And so there's.
I think Hunter's being treated real well.
There's going to be some attitudes going on. Yeah, but, here's Austin getting the big spot at WrestleMania, and Austin's been going for a year. Hunter's been carrying the company. It's kind of a slap in the face. I think there's going to be problems there.
Well,
or he'll get himself in that main event.
Or yeah, that's right. Or they'll figure out a way to make it a three-way. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
Let's go to Jeff in Alberta. Jeff, you're going to be our last caller tonight.
Hi, Dave and Brian and Honky Tonk Man. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, awesome. I actually wanted to ask you about Wrestling with Shadows, but I guess you answered that pretty good. What I wanted to ask is, do you have a website, or do you just contribute all over the place, or what?
No, that's all. I just whoever asks me to do something for them, I do. I don't do the website thing. I just never. It got cluttered with wrestling and with wrestlers, and people have taken up domain names and things, so I just kind of leave it alone.
Okay. Do you have any connections to Calgary anymore, or not really?
No, not at all. Other than my wife being a Calgarian, and I was up there last year for 3 or 4 days, but I was working over in Vancouver and British Columbia for those guys, and I was just in Calgary for a couple of days. Other than that, no. I did play golf there. It's a nice golf course.
Okay, awesome. Hey, actually, one more thing about Wrestling with Shadows. Maybe you can answer this, because I've never really heard a good answer for it. But why exactly were they letting him film that?
It was a deal that WWF. It was actually a deal that WWF set up with High Road Productions. They wanted to do a deal. You got to remember the time frame of all this, okay? With the Wrestling with Shadows and also with Beyond the Mat. The WWF was losing in the ratings to WCW,
right?
And they were just looking
friendly.
So they were very friendly, and Bret Hart was their #1 star, and this was a Canadian film that was going to create this aura of Bret Hart as this Canadian hero, and that's exactly what Vince wanted. And that filming of that movie was done in August. It was the climax of the movie was supposed to be Bret Hart winning the title from Undertaker in the match where Shawn interfered.
Right.
And then that was it. Bret struggles and he turns down that offer and he wins the world title and we have a happy ending. And then what happened was right before, I guess a week before the thing in Montreal, Bret called them up and just goes, there may be something interesting. I think Bret used them as an insurance policy, quite frankly. And so they were with him everywhere when that thing was going down, and they got a hell of a movie out of it.
Yeah, they followed this guy around for 6 months, and Bret's not the most exciting guy to follow around, I can tell you that. But they followed him around for 6 months. In the last 48 hours, they got some of the best film footage they could have ever have gotten.
You know what's funny, too, is, and I didn't even know this, but there's some awesome footage that they had that they didn't put in the movie from that same frame, just because one of the agreements they had was that Undertaker would never be shown out of character. And I actually have talked to people who've seen it, the actual footage. Some of the footage with Undertaker, he was furious at Vince for what Vince did, and he was pounding on Vince's door. You probably all heard the stories, Undertaker pounding on the door. They have that footage, but because of the agreement that they made with WWF that Undertaker and Stone Cold would be the two guys that they would never show out of character. The WWF, those were the only ones they wanted to protect. They could show Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, anyone else in the company any way you want, but they just wanted to protect those two. So out of basically the fact that of that promise, all that footage of Undertaker, really blowing up, he was the one who really blew up after that, except aside from Bret, they didn't air any of it. So, I don't know.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up for me, man.
They did get some good footage.
Yeah, they did. They didn't get the punch, though. They almost got it. They got Vince staggering out, though.
Yeah, that would have been worth seeing. Gosh, I would like to have seen that.
I think a lot of people
good tussle.
Yeah.
Not,
anyway,
not one of those, real dirty ones or anything, but just a good little tussle is good. It's good for morale.
That's pretty interesting. Hey, we're totally out of time. I can't even ask you this question. So, okay. Now, you were there were you there when Vince gave the speech after that?
Yeah.
Where he was explaining his side of the story of what.
Yeah, this is what's really good. This is a good part of the whole thing. I looked around the room and kind of like, holy hell, why don't you help me? He said, I helped Brett get his deal. I helped Brett get his 3-year, $3 million deal, a deal worth about $9 million. I helped him negotiate that. We're all going, well, hell, why don't you help us then? Help us get that same deal.
I know Vince is there, and he took it for the company.
Yeah, that was something. But he explained it in a way that really should have satisfied everyone. And you get into this business, if you don't know stuff like that's going to happen, brother, you better wake up and smell the roses, because it happens every day. It happens in booking meetings, agent meetings. It happens on every aspect of the wrestling and professional sports and entertainment business. It's not the sweetest thing. It's a lovely business, but it is dirty.
Now, what would have happened if you were in the ring on that NBC thing and somebody would have done something to you, and all of a sudden they would have double-crossed you? Because it was actually a very similar situation.
Oh yeah, I probably would have punched him too. There would have been with me. There's a pecking order of punches. So, if I'd have seen Strongbow, I'd have punched him first, and then, if I'd have seen Lanza, I'd have got him next, or he'd have probably ran from me. I'd have probably run to try to hit him. But then I would have eventually, but, Bad News tried this, and Vince locked himself in a room, so Bad News couldn't get to him. So, you got, if you're going to make that punch, you got to really, you got to kind of hide it,
Anyway, I want to thank you very much for doing the show, and we'll be having you on soon, hopefully. And I want to remind everyone we'll be back tomorrow at 5.